I gotta ask you, Eric, you're somebody with great experience on the Hill. You've met with elected officials across the board. You've briefed so many of them over the years, as we know so well. What aren't those officials in the Biden administration getting when it comes to this clear message from Israelis? It's not about Netanyahu. It's about Israelis in general. This is where Israel stands today. What is so difficult to understand?
You know, people conflate Israel with the government that's there now. That would be like saying you don't like a Trump administration, America doesn't have a right to exist. That's crazy. This is a Democratic government, and they have created a coalition. And it's not a great coalition, and lots of people can shoot at it, but it is what is there at this time. And it is not purely Israel. But as I've told people all the time, whether Yael Lapid or Benny Gantz, opposition leaders, were in charge, prosecuting this war the same way Bibi Netanyahu is.
Right.
Having said that, I have an article in the Jerusalem Post today saying that the Israelis are, the Netanyahu administration coalition is basically into its political election mode and is pandering to a domestic audience and is undermining the message it's giving to the United States and the supporters that are there. So there really is a problem here. And I think the Israelis really need to know that the war going on right now may almost be more important, the war keeping American support. And what are Americans thinking, getting back to your original question? They've come up with, October 7th was really terrible, but Israel is now doing even worse. And they don't know about the proportionality in the war and Israel's morality and ethics, and that they forget about that Hamas uses its people as as human shields of why. And they're believing numbers that are ridiculously conflated, which makes the percentage of combatants killed to civilians small. Although, of course, every life is precious. But Israel is comporting with international law, and I think a lot in the administration have lost sight of that.
Yeah, and how can it even be compared between the targeted torture, massacre, and mutilations of innocents, which was done premeditatedly, compared to what Israel is trying to achieve? I mean, it's ridiculous on its face.
We live here in the West with, it's ancient history, October 7th to them. They don't know that Israel has a couple of 100,000 people who are not in the homes. They don't know the thousands of reservists that have been injured. These are soldiers, but these are sanitation workers, doctors, lawyers, accountants, who have been injured and can't take care of their families anymore, the devastation that Israel as a society has taken. And the focus is totally on the suffering, and there are sufferings of the Palestinians, or the humanitarian aid that is supposedly not going into, but is a much more complex story than that.
Right, and not to mention the fact that there is usually one word missing from those descriptions in what we see in Western media outlets, which is the word Hamas. As if this misery came out of nowhere, and Hamas had nothing to do with it after ruling the Gaza Strip for 17 years. Eric, I got to ask you about the times. We're talking now about Ramadan. How significant is that factor in what's happening now on the ground in the Middle East, but specifically in the Gaza Strip and in Judea and Samaria?
So it was my assessment, and unfortunately I think it's coming true, is Hamas did not want there to be a pause in the fighting for a hostage release, that they're using Ramadan as another front to try to incite Palestinians in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Palestinian citizens of Israel, Israeli Arabs, to have an uprising. And so I went in to Jenin and Nablus area with the deputy battalion commander in charge there to see what's going on. And I think what your viewers need to know is that Hamas, really Iran, has been inciting the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, for years with weapons, with cash. And the only reason it has not gone out of control is because Israel has gone in every day to extract terrorists and stop terrorism. They do it all the time, way before October 7th, but it has dramatically increased. I will tell you, just on the other side, the administration is totally focused on some rogue settlers doing some bad things. but I wanted to go in firsthand to interview, and I found out there are some people that should be held responsible that do things to Palestinians, but in proportion, it is a tiny amount in comparison to the threat that Israelis are facing from radicalism and terrorism in the West Bank.
So let's hope, Hamas's plan, just like it was foiled on October 7th in their desire to create a multi-regional all-out war, let's hope they fail this time as well. But still, the war comes to mind, Eric. And when we look at the Gaza Strip, we look at incredible success of the Israel Defense Forces. I think, unbelievable success in historic proportions when it comes to the kind of urban warfare and underground warfare that's taking place. I'll also mention that according to initial estimates, the expectation, let's say, of potential casualties, the number was much higher in the initial estimates of the IDF. But still, there is one big cloud looming over it all, Eric, and that's called Rafah. And dealing with the Egyptian border and the Philadelphia course, we've seen Israel continuously announcing that plans are ready for an immediate operation there. Why isn't Israel moving forward with an operation in Rafah to conclude its operation against Hamas? So much has already been taken out as far as their infrastructure, their military installations, their underground tunnels, their factories. But Rafah is still standing. And according to some estimates, most of the hostages who may be still alive are there.
So for you who don't know, Rafah is the major city, really the main conduit of bringing in weapons from Egypt and the Sinai into Gaza. The Philadelphia corridor is 8.9 miles, the border between Sinai and Gaza.
Right.
So I can tell you, as of not that many days ago, the Israelis still had not made a decision about how to evacuate possibly 1 million civilians that are there. I've been chastising them again and again and again for way more than a month that they should have had a plan to get these people out. I said the original plan when the people moved from the north to the south of 635 little squares where they move people around will not fly with this administration. And I said, at the very least, you should have been moving people out in anticipation of Rafah, even if you didn't want to go in until after Ramadan. And they have made, I think this is a major mistake, and I've been critical of both in my writings in public and also privately to the Israeli government that it undermines their interests. They tell me Rafah will always be there and we can go in. And I say, you are incorrect. You have a timeline. The administration cannot American administration cannot keep supporting you. And as I said, they're already thinking of slow walking arms that are there. And at the very least, if they would have started moving out civilians, that would have created leverage to let Hamas know you were serious about going into Rafah. There are 4 battalions in Rafah. By the way, there's 2 other intact battalions in central Gaza and refugee camps.
Correct.
That is, so it only knocked out about 60 to 70%. So Rafah, why they haven't done it, even though they say they will, I think they've really handled that situation purely on timing poorly, and it's to their disadvantage. And every day that they don't do it, it's going to get harder and harder. They need to do what they need to do for their existential interests.